Have you ever stopped to wonder why Muhammad's name doesn't appear in the Christian Bible? He was one of the most influential men in history. He united tribes, changed the destiny of a people, and spread a message that became a faith for millions to this day. Yet, his name is nowhere to be found in the scriptures. What does this reveal? Was he simply overlooked, or could he have been mentioned in a way almost no one noticed? In this video, you'll discover Muhammad's story from a time when his city, Mecca, was dominated by stone gods, repetitive rituals, and religious practices that felt more like superstition than true faith. It was a place where religion lined the pockets of the powerful but left souls empty. In that world, a young orphan began to see something was deeply wrong, and he decided to change everything. But here's the most surprising part of this story. Some scholars believe Muhammad might actually be mentioned in the Christian Bible, not by name, but hidden in the subtext, tucked away in mysterious visions and nearly forgotten texts. If you're looking for a fresh perspective on faith, interpretations that challenge the norm, and hidden connections between religions, watch this video until the end. Because sometimes what history silences, the truth boldly reveals. Before Muhammad was born, Mecca was more than a desert trading hub. It was vibrant on the outside, but spiritually barren within. Colorful tents swayed in the hot wind. Merchants shouted their prices, gold changed hands, and the sounds of caravans mingled with tribal chants. But beneath this facade of wealth, something essential was lost: the meaning of faith. At the heart of the city stood a simple cubic structure made of dark stone. It was called the Kaaba, and for the Arabs, it was the holiest place on earth. According to ancient traditions, it was built by Abraham and Ishmael as a house of worship for the one God. But by then, the Kaaba was surrounded by over 300 idols of stone and wood. Each tribe worshipped its own. Each statue represented a desire, a superstition, a god crafted in the image of man. People circled the Kaaba in rituals passed down through generations. There were sacrifices, offerings, prayers, but there was no soul. Religion had become a system, a lifeless routine. The powerful used the sacred as currency. They sacrificed for profit. They prayed for convenience. Faith had turned into theater, performed daily before a people who no longer expected answers. Justice was a commodity. The rich bought influence. The poor were ignored. Women had no rights, no voice. And among some tribes, a brutal practice stained the desert sands: female infanticide. When a girl was born, many parents saw her as a disgrace or burden. They feared she'd bring shame to the clan or be captured by enemies in the future. So, in silence or even celebration, she was buried alive, without guilt, without a name, without a story. This was the reality. Mecca was rich in gold, but wretched in compassion. It had rituals, but no faith. It had priests, but no prophets. God's silence echoed through temples crowded with false gods, and anyone who dared to seek something more was labeled a fool. But even amid idolatry, fear, and injustice, something stirred. Invisible, a whisper in the desert, a gaze that saw beyond the statues. God in silence was still watching. In this dry, unjust, empty setting, a fatherless boy was born. An orphan who would see firsthand all that was wrong. A boy who learned not from shouts, but from silences, and whose heart from a young age carried the unease of someone who feels the world must change. He would grow up without altars, but full of questions. He would walk among idols, but with his eyes fixed on the heavens. His name? Muhammad, the one who would fall silent to listen, and who would speak when no one else dared to tell the truth. Muhammad was born in 571 AD in Mecca, into a respected family of the Quraysh tribe. But the prestige of his lineage didn't shield him from the pain of abandonment. His father died before he was born. His mother, Amina, passed away when he was just 6. Orphaned so young, Muhammad knew the silence of grief as a child. Raised by his grandfather and later his uncle Abu Talib, he learned to observe the world without complaint. While other boys played in dusty streets, he walked in silence, as if he already knew life held more questions than answers. As a young man, he worked as a shepherd, learning solitude, patience, and responsibility. Later, he joined trade caravans across the desert, enduring scorching heat and biting cold. These experiences shaped his character, steadfast, honest, observant. He was called Al-Amin, the trustworthy, for his integrity and dealings. Yet despite this recognition, Muhammad didn't chase vanity. A quiet restlessness stirred within him, as if markets, coins, and society's applause couldn't fill the void he felt. When he married Khadija, a wealthy widow who deeply admired him, he found a safe haven, but not spiritual rest. Increasingly, he sought solitude in the mountains to meditate. He climbed Mount Hira, and there, in a narrow cave, he gazed at the sky and into his soul. He questioned Mecca's idols. He questioned imposed truths. He questioned the meaning of existence. Muhammad wasn't just a good man. He was a man in search. And like all great searches, his was about to find an answer that would change the world's destiny. Mount Hira wasn't notable for its height or beauty. It was just a barren rock, isolated, far from Mecca's noisy markets. But for Muhammad, that mount was more than stone. It was a refuge, a spiritual shelter where the world stopped shouting and the soul could finally listen. At its summit was a narrow, silent cave, the cave of Hira. It was there, in that absence of noise, that he found space to think, to feel, to seek. Muhammad climbed the mount alone, carrying water, dates, and a restless heart. He performed no rituals. He recited no formulas. He simply looked to the sky and within himself. He didn't know what he was searching for, but he knew something was missing, and in that solitude among rocks and wind, he waited for God to speak, even if only in silence. The nights on Hira were long. The cold bit at his bones. The stars seemed closer than the people below, and it was on one such night at the age of 40 that the heavens broke the silence. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad was in deep contemplation when a presence filled the space. The air grew heavy, the rock trembled, and then he saw. It was the angel Gabriel, Jibril, God's messenger. "Read," the angel commanded. The voice was like thunder. Startled, Muhammad replied, "But I cannot read." The command repeated 3 times, until the words came, words that would change history. "Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot." Muhammad didn't understand what was happening, but he knew it wasn't human. It was fire and light, raw truth, a calling. He descended the mount in shock. His body trembled, his heart raced. He sought refuge in the arms of his wife, Khadija. In tears, he said, "I fear for myself." But she didn't hesitate. She didn't doubt. She enveloped him with tenderness and faith. She believed before the world did. She took him to Waraka ibn Nawfal, a Christian scholar of the scriptures. Hearing the account, Waraka said, "This is the same spirit that came to Moses. You will be the prophet of this people." There, a mission was born. Without swords, without temples, without thrones, only with words. Words that began in a desert and would cross continents. Words that would be persecuted, fought, but never erased. Muhammad didn't yet know, but in that moment his life was no longer his alone. And his voice, once silent in the mountains, would now echo through the centuries. Because when God speaks, even silence cannot resist. When Muhammad began preaching in Mecca, his message seemed simple at first. There is no God but Allah. But that simplicity hid an earthquake. Declaring one God was in practice declaring war on the city's power structure. For the Quraysh leaders, idolatry wasn't just faith. It was commerce, status, control. Pilgrims to the Kaaba generated fortunes. Toppling the idols meant toppling the economy. And Muhammad, with his calm yet firm voice, was a threat. His words stung. They exposed wounds. They demanded change. He spoke of justice, compassion, and equality between rich and poor. He said, Allah sees hearts, and no one is above the truth. This enraged the powerful. Mockery turned to boycotts. Followers were beaten in public, some killed. Muhammad was called mad, a sorcerer, a liar. But he didn't back down. He kept preaching, even to few listeners, even when driven out, even when threatened with death. The persecution grew so intense that many Muslims fled to Abyssinia. Muhammad suffered profound losses. His wife Khadija, his safe haven, passed away. His uncle Abu Talib, his protector, followed. He was vulnerable, but his faith never wavered. He knew a truth sent from above doesn't depend on human acceptance. Even if the whole world turned against him, he'd keep proclaiming the divine unity. The resistance didn't break him. It strengthened his mission. Every attack, every insult, every attempt to silence him was in truth a seal of authenticity. Muhammad didn't seek glory, he sought liberation. And the first to hear him were those without a voice. Amid growing hostility in Mecca, Muhammad received an unexpected invitation. Representatives from Yathrib, later called Medina, asked him to mediate tribal conflicts. They had heard his message and saw in him not just a preacher, but a just man. This historic migration, known as the Hijra, marks the start of the Islamic calendar. In a city willing to listen, Muhammad ceased to be a lone voice and became the leader of a community. In Medina, he didn't impose a religion by the sword. He built a society with wisdom. He forged alliances with Jews and Arab tribes, established just laws, and guided peaceful coexistence among diverse groups. For the first time, Muslims could practice their faith freely, but it was more than that. Among them grew a sense of brotherhood, mutual responsibility, and shared destiny. Muhammad planted the seeds of a new world. The transformation was clear. The poor were cared for, orphans protected, women valued. Men were defined not by tribe, but by faith and character. Prayer, fasting, charity, and pilgrimage weren't empty rituals. They were bridges between the human and the divine. The Ummah, the community of believers, was born as a living response to Mecca's chaos. Medina became a beacon, and Muhammad a model of spiritual and political leadership. Despite constant threats from the Quraysh, he remained steadfast and merciful. He didn't seek vengeance, but justice. He didn't preach conquest, but heart conversion. In little time, the faith that sprouted in secret in the mountains now illuminated entire deserts, and tribes, once enemies, began uniting under one banner: submission to the one God. Though Muhammad's name isn't explicitly in the Bible, some scholars believe it's not entirely absent, just hidden. Could the Christian scriptures, or even apocryphal texts, contain veiled hints of his coming? This controversial hypothesis sparks the mind and challenges traditional theology. In John 14, Jesus speaks of a comforter who would come after him, sent by the Father, speaking not of himself, but guiding into all truth. For many Christians, this clearly refers to the Holy Spirit, but some Muslim scholars suggest this comforter, in Greek parakletos, could point to a man, a messenger. Curiously, some ancient manuscripts use periklutos, praiseworthy, instead of parakletos. Periklutos can translate to Ahmad, one of Muhammad's prophetic names in the Quran. If confirmed, this small variation reshapes the passage entirely. Was Jesus announcing a prophet to come, praiseworthy, guiding humanity to truth? It's a question that unsettles but also broadens the horizons of faith. Others point to Isaiah 42, which speaks of a chosen servant of God who will bring justice to the nations, be a light to the Gentiles, and establish a covenant with the people. Many attribute this to Jesus, but some see traces of Muhammad's mission, a man from outside Israel, illiterate, yet bearer of a revelation that spread across the East. The region of Kedar, mentioned in the same chapter, was home to Ishmael's descendants, the Arabs' ancestors. The Gospel of Barnabas, considered apocryphal by Christian tradition, but preserved in some Eastern traditions, explicitly names Muhammad, claiming Jesus foretold his coming. Though rejected by the official canon, this text fuels speculation and the search for hidden connections. This isn't about imposing a truth, but asking a legitimate question: what if part of the story we know is incomplete? If Muhammad's name was whispered where we only sought shouts, perhaps we're facing a revelation still unfolding. After all, silence is also a form of speech, especially in matters of God. Muhammad's story isn't just history. It resonates today as a call to personal and collective transformation. In a world fractured by ideological, religious, and cultural divides, his message offers a living response: unity. Unity among those seeking the sacred, those desiring justice, those who see faith not as a tool of division but of reconciliation. Muhammad lived in a society steeped in idolatry, inequality, and meaninglessness. But he didn't conform. He observed, questioned, sought, until he found. His journey shows that any human, no matter how humble, can spark a revolution by living with purpose. He taught that true faith isn't a mechanical ritual, but a conscious connection with the Creator, a commitment to good, a daily practice of humility, charity, and righteousness. Today, these lessons remain urgent. In an age where spirituality blends with marketing and inner silence is drowned by the world's noise, returning to the basics can be revolutionary. Rejecting modern idols, ego, status, intolerance, and returning to faith's essence, to love, serve, build. Muhammad didn't ask to be worshipped. He asked us to heed the call to truth, justice, and the one God. Regardless of personal beliefs, there's something universal in his message. We're all born with a spark of light, and it's our mission to ignite it. Today's world needs more faith with action, more truth with compassion, more spirituality with awareness. Muhammad's life isn't just history, it's a mirror, and perhaps in seeing ourselves in him, we can rediscover who we are. Throughout this journey, we've traced the path of a man who dared to break the silence of his time. Muhammad wasn't just a historical figure. He was a spiritual response to an era lost in darkness, even rejected by many, even ignored by some traditions. He remains a vital link in the chain of revelation. His story still challenges narratives, unsettles certainties, and invites reflection. The absence of his name in the Bible doesn't mean an absence of meaning. And perhaps it's in that silence that the deepest call lies: to seek, investigate, confront. Because faith isn't complacency, it's movement. And true knowledge never confines. It frees, it expands, it illuminates. If this video made you think differently, if it sparked a doubt or a new question, then your mission has begun. Write in the comments, knowledge is never too much. Share this content with those ready to see beyond the obvious, and subscribe to the channel because there are still many secrets waiting for those unafraid to ask. Muhammad's name may not be written in your Bible, but what if it's etched in the silence between the lines?